Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions, where we don't deal with strange Russian conspiracies and fake news like much of the corporate news out there seems to dwell on. Anyway, so you don't need to wear any tinfoil hats here, as opposed to the big corporations in corporate newses in New York and Los Angeles. Anyway, what I'd like to deal with today, though, well, first of all, make a plug here. If you're listening to us later on YouTube, click on the link so you can check out my official website. It's up there in the corner of the video, and also become a subscriber. Anyway, now, what I'd like to deal with today is somewhat unusual, but I think it's something that it just seems to be out there, and more so than I ever dreamed or ever would have feared, and that is a Freudian concept that it was one of those. There's two things about Freud that I totally have disagreed with as I've studied him. One is his whole totem theory. I'm not so big on that. I'm not going to deal with that tonight, though. The next one is what at least has become the label for his views in regards to human destruction, and that's Thanatos, which is the opposite of Eros. And that's the idea that Freud proposed, that there's a duality in our psychology. We both have a creative instinct, which, of course, later, after Freud's death, actually, you got this term, Thanatos versus Eros. Eros deals with wanting to create, to bring life into the world, to want to develop things in our lives and use our psychic energy or libido to create stuff, versus Thanatos, which is the other side, kind of this yin-yang sort of thing, which yearns for psychic release, in other words, death. And Freud speculated, especially around the World War I era, that human beings had a suicide instinct about them, that there was something in our psyche, in our subconscious, that propels us to self-destruction. And fortunately, in most cases, the Eros side, or the life force, I'm just going to use Eros and Thanatos because that's what's usually out there in regards to these theories, that overpowers that and stays in control. That's why we generally don't jump off bridges and off tall buildings and so forth. But the thing is that Freud speculated that both on the individual level and the social level, that humans have a destructive impulse. Now, I've heard this speculated as to why we like to watch zombie movies, or scary movies, or slasher movies, where it throws us into a fear state. And I've always felt that maybe it's because human beings like to skirt on the edges, okay? We have this thing about maybe not going to the limit, that the whole idea that you like to get those pictures next to the cliff. Like if you're visiting some place like the Grand Canyon, that you like to get that picture right up next to the drop-off, or you like to go over that little bridgeway. At least I think it used to exist there. They probably got a big fence up there now, but it used to be this little fence at Niagara Falls, and it said, "Do not go beyond this." And of course, I jumped it, and this was years ago, back in college, and made sure that my friends got pictures of me while I was sitting on a rock next to the river as it's just about ready to descend down into the falls. I've always felt like humans have this kind of thrill seeking. Get close, get the adrenaline pumping, and then pull back. I think personally that is valid. I think that's how we really are. We don't really want to push it to that proverbial limit and therefore not survive. However, I'm kind of wondering in recent days if maybe Freud had it right more so than I've ever given him credit for. This whole thing with the Russians. Okay, now you may be listening to this later, after Trump's inauguration, but this time period here around New Year's, in which you have everyone wanting to punish Russia. There's no proof whatsoever the Russians hacked into the elections. In fact, it is interesting that Obama had noted that there had been no interference in the elections. This was before the elections took place. Our election system is totally rig-free, because at first Trump was saying this could get rigged, and Obama was saying there's no way anyone's going to rig the elections. And then right afterwards, it was like, okay, everything was done fairly. Then it started changing. You started seeing all of these really strange things about, well, we need to have a recount in certain states. Ironically, only the states that Trump won narrowly, not the ones where Hillary won narrowly. Then we had the Electoral College thing, where there was this big push, even by some of the liberal movie stars, oh, please don't vote for Trump, and that sort of thing. And, then we have this whole thing about, well, the Russians did it. I mean, talk about conspiracy theories, okay? Right now, people can believe just about anything in regards to Russia, at least when it comes to maybe more, people that are more Democrat, more the Democrats. The thing is, this is not, I'm not making this a pro-Trump, anti-Trump, pro-Russia, anti-Russia thing. I just want to get down to the facts here. And that is, first of all, Assange has pointed out the WikiLeaks, the information that came out, because, that's where all this really came from originally. He said, WikiLeaks stands by its releases, that they were totally valid. Second of all, even if Vladimir Putin himself had sat down at a computer console and personally used his superhuman powers and hacked into the Democratic National Committee, wouldn't that ultimately be that he just released information out that was trying to be kept secret from the public? If anything, why hasn't there been investigations into the way that the Democratic Party used its influence against Bernie Sanders? You want to talk about a rigged election then. How about all the stuff, that has been brought out that at least is ethically questionable? No one's talking about that. It's, the Russians did it. You know what? It doesn't matter who did it. If a bank robber comes by and his getaway car doesn't start, and you're a serial killer, and you've parked your car in front of the bank, and that bank robber's trying to, he gets in the car and he just pulls up a blanket and finds 3 bodies in the back seat. It doesn't matter if he jumps out and then actually says, hey, police, there's bodies in here, help. It doesn't matter, okay? You can't then, as a serial killer, say, hey, wait a minute, this guy was doing something illegal. He got in my car illegally, and therefore he's to blame for those bodies in the back of the seat. And that's crazy. But the thing is, we got this situation, okay? We got this situation where these things have been leaked, and the media has done its best to divert attention away from those things, including, how the big corporate media was actually getting marching orders from the Hillary campaign. Can we write this? Is this okay to send out? And that, they didn't do that for Trump, that's for sure. And the thing is, this was, this is questionable stuff that's not being dealt with. So then now we got this, the Russians hacked into everything. And you got, I'm not going to name names, why give them credibility, but you got some crazy old Republican senators that are kind of like, this is an act of war, that sort of thing. And Democratic ones like, this just kind of, brings into question the results and all this kind of stuff. But the thing is that we have a situation in which now we have all these conspiracy theories about how the Russians have to be punished. Okay? Even though no one has any proof that they did this. They've got to be punished. We have, we've got to find sanctions. We've got to expel diplomats. We've got to, maybe even see this as an act of war. Is this insane? Is this the proof that Freud was right? That we have people who are so caught up into this kind of self-destruct instinct that they're willing to say, let's just go full scale and push it to the limit and see what happens. Well, you know what? It's one thing if someone goes over the fence and gets their picture next to Niagara Falls and happens to accidentally slip in and go over the waterfall. Okay? That's one person dead. Not an entire civilization. But, I see people, out there saying, let's do it. Liberals that are like, we gotta really take action. Excuse me. Whatever happened to the whole idea that the Democratic Party was the party of peace and the Republican Party was the one of military? Has that turned around or something? It sure seems like it, because there's a lot of chicken hawks out there like, let's just go to war, and that sort of thing. And I'm sorry, but remember, I interviewed Dr. Helen Caldicott a while back, and she noted that even just a small percentage of the nuclear arsenal that the United States or Russia possesses, if it went off in a war, a limited nuclear war, that would pretty much mean most people would die. And if it was a little bit more than that small number that went off, pretty much almost everyone on the earth would die. It'd be like The Walking Dead. I saw somewhere that in the Walking Dead world, it's supposed to be like 5,000 zombies to every one human that's alive, which means that comes down to less than 1 million survivors on the planet Earth. That might actually be generous if there was a full-scale nuclear war, that you'd have 1 million survivors. I don't know if humans would totally disappear. I think that they probably got bunkers with enough food that you could last out the 10 years and then go out and start farming again. But it would be the end of civilization. And, of course, then we'd have all the nuclear power plants. You'd have to be in an area where there was no nuclear power plants that, just suddenly, had to go into meltdown phase because no one was there to take care of them. But the thing is that this is insane, okay? This is, and, this, Freud would probably think that, this is the whole Thanatos theory coming about. That humans have a self-destruction that could even lead us to a nuclear war. And, every time I see these people posting things on social media or piping off on the news and stuff like that, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really scary. You didn't have this even during the height of the Cold War. Okay? I mean, what if we did not have Vladimir Putin in, who seems to be someone who has a cool head? What if you had some crazy that was in charge over there? I mean, think about the consequences. All right? Now, then we get into I'd like to explore this a little deeper, though, because I think this whole idea that Freud had has a little bit of merit now, the Thanatos theory, or the desire for destruction. And, I'm wondering about this. I have actually talked to people who have smoking habits or obesity problems. And, if you're just sitting and talking and eventually, they're sharing more intimate details about how they feel about things, often the smoker will say, you know what? I don't care. I mean, this is kind of someone will actually admit, this is kind of a slow way of just, not having to hang around Earth much longer. People that eat, some of them will actually admit, well, I eat as a way of dealing with life, and then you say, well, this could reduce your lifespan by 20, 30 years. And they're like, well, maybe that's for the best. And you're like, my gosh, what is going on here? And I'm wondering if the preoccupation that a lot of people have with not taking care of themselves, because personally, I don't understand it. I mean, in my own ideas, I always want to be in the kind of health that's my optimal level. And maybe it's because when I was growing up, there were so many people around me that I saw who were not in optimal levels, who had to take, massive amounts of medication. My parents were much older than average. I was adopted. And, when you're a kid, you're hearing all this like, well, I had this taken out, or, my hip needs replacing, or my doctor just prescribed me this medicine and this medicine and this medicine. And you see their medicine cabinet, my gosh, it looks like a pharmacy. And they're taking one pill every day from each of those bottles. And I was just like, no way do I ever want to be that way. And so I, exercise, and I can't say that I eat like right in respect to, the whole what would be expected as a balanced diet, but I do make sure that I get the exercise I need, the rest I need, and all those kinds of things, and challenge my mind constantly. And the thing is that a lot of people don't do that, and I'm wondering if it could be just kind of a reaction to today's world. You sit in front of the TV. They've actually done studies and found it. The more time you spend watching TV, the more depression you have, which then, you know what that does? It's a feedback loop. The more depression you have, the more you watch TV, which means the more depression. It's just that it's like that thing where you're putting on some weight and you put it on around your waist, especially men, and you get this belly fat that actually produces estrogen, and the estrogen slows you down. It causes you to gain weight. It counteracts testosterone. You become sluggish. And eventually, you just want to just sit, and you start doing what's called conservation of movement. That's when they've actually done studies where they've seen how much time people move from just going to the refrigerator or going from one place to another, or even the amount of times you use the bathroom. And it's generally found that you, just by moving more in the house, you'll lose maybe 300 or 400 extra calories a day. But conserving movement, and this is before, the whole remote thing, you might have had that idea of getting up and switching the channels versus just sitting there, well, here's another TV show on, I guess I'll just have to sit here and watch it. And the thing is, the more you watch the television, the more it causes the psychological things that would lead you to building more weight, feeling less energized. And also, you watch television, it's constant violence. You hear about how lousy the world is, how everything's falling apart, and the only thing that they come on with, in the middle is, oh, here's the cheerful person reading the sports, and here's the cheerful person reading the weather. Nope, now it's back to, oh, the world's a horrible place. And then you see the commercials, which tell you, well, here's how you can compensate for all those bad things you've got wrong with you, including now in the United States. Oh my gosh, got all these, use such and such drug, and cure the problems you have. But this is you look at a picture of people back in the 1950s, any group photo, and you'll generally see everyone's thin. If you look in the 1970s, usually thin. You look nowadays, and you've got a lot of people that are overweight. And there's something there beyond just the convenience of food, I think. I think there is a sense of almost a giving up on just life in general. And this can be subconscious. Just kind of like, well, is it really worth putting on a few extra years? Just, pass the butter and pass the this and this and this. And so maybe some of the obesity and smoking thing has to do with the self-destruction. Then, there's this whole concept of nihilism. Nihilism is this idea that there is no purpose in life, that it's all just, why bother it? When I think of a nihilist, I always think of that movie version of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where you got that robot that's, it's like really smart, but it's like, well, what's the point? It's just the world's, why bother? That sort of thing. And the thing is that nihilism is something I think is very epidemic in our society. Now, most people don't know much about the philosophy of it, but they live it. And there's a sort of okay, what do you live for? Well, and this leads to people, just like with the TV thing, it leads to people being less energized about getting married and having a family, and so they're alone, and then they feel more depressed because they're alone, and we don't have, a lot of people don't have social networking. They don't go to church anymore. They don't have these kinds of fraternal organizations. It used to be pretty standard back in, let's say, the more 1950s and 1960s. And so, really, they're very detached. And this can lead to kind of a sense of not necessarily clinical depression, but somewhat of a sense of maybe apathy and malaise. And, I think it's much greater than when Jimmy Carter had the thing about the malaise that was overtaking the society. And, I will point this out. Every study I've ever seen that's dealing with religion and society and health has shown that being involved in a religion improves not only your life, but also your health and also your longevity. And we could go into all the reasons for that, but I think ultimately one of the things is it gives you purpose. It gives you a sense of why you're here. You're not just some accident that took place, and now you're just kind of bouncing around like some sort of Skinnerian rat in a maze and interacting with the environment, and then you die, and then you become maggot food. There's more to life than that, okay? And, I really do think that society will eventually come to terms with that, and you'll see more and more emphasis on trying to find some sort of spirituality. I sort of sense this taking place in much of the world today. Now, another thing here I would point out is our view on family. I'm just wondering, is one of the reasons why Europeans don't have kids anymore, and much of America, especially in the states like California, I just read, California's birth rate is lower than it was during the Depression. And that's even with people who have higher than average birth rates, coming from Latin American backgrounds and so forth, making up a substantial portion of the population of California now. The birth rate, I've heard from many people, if you go into neighborhoods maybe surrounding affluent areas of Los Angeles and San Francisco, you don't see kids. You do not see children. And it is because the the people there, many of them are either single or they're double income, no kids. And if you have a sort of sense of nihilism, then maybe that contributes to our, well, I'm just going to have my fun now while I'm young, and then, when I'm older, I'll be able to retire on my retirement policy, pensions and so forth, or 401ks, and then I'll just die. Who cares what happens? And I see that as part of a destructive mentality that goes back to the Thanatos idea. It's sort of, well, the world ends with me. And I've actually talked to many, many, many people, especially those with liberal arts degrees in college. And they'll say, you get a 25-year-old woman, well, I'm not going to have kids. And you say, well, doesn't that mean that's kind of the end of your family line, especially if they were an only child in their family? And they're like, yeah, well, I guess that's the end, that'll be the end of this family. And you're thinking, it's almost like with a lot of people, there's almost kind of a glee in their voice and their expressions when they point out that their family line is over. And how can that be, that, if you just have a few people like that, that's one thing, but there's a lot of people like that. And maybe there is this idea that they've just kind of looked at society and thought, well, who cares? I was talking to someone from Germany the other day. He was a young student, and he noted that out of like 12 women he knows that are in his classes and stuff, that one of them wants to get married and have children. And we were talking, and he brought up the idea that Germans have this guilt complex from World War II, and that many of them, he said that there's a pride in having no pride of being German. And I think this is something that is, you look upon many of the people who are more the liberal people in the blue states, in the urban areas of the United States, and they'll say somewhat the same thing about America. They always emphasize the bad stuff. It's always the bad. I'm sorry, that's like going to a really nice dinner and then someone saying, that's all going to be in the toilet in 24 hours. I mean, talk about a spoiler there. All right? But that's the way that many people look at their culture nowadays. And if you have this idea that you've only emphasized the negative, you've only emphasized the bad things of your past, then you're going to get into a situation in which, why make the sacrifices to continue it? And you're going to also maybe have a certain level of happiness. Yes, happiness. When you know that your family line's going to go and is going to become extinct. I wonder if these kind of people watch those shows like, what was it? Was it on History Channel? It was called Earth Population Zero a few years ago. I watched a bunch of those. I found them interesting from a scientific basis. How long would it take New York City to totally crumble to where it was just a forest again? And, you watch sci-fi and you're thinking, someone comes back into the future 2,000 years and they're walking through the ruins of New York. And actually, that wouldn't be the case. It would, because of weathering on the concrete and the metal and so forth, it would be back to hardly anything that you'd be able to find intact in New York after 1,000 years. Pyramids are here because they're out in the middle of the desert. The thing is that you wonder if people, when they're watching those kind of shows, or maybe even watching zombie shows where everyone dies, that they're not happy about that. It gives a certain thrill. And, if it's the Eros part, the part that wants to create, that wants to make babies and build things and advance, to a degree, if it has not been given enough nourishment, if it's only been hit on, and pounded into the ground, and then this other aspect of human mentality comes through, well, it's no wonder we see many of the problems we see today. And it may actually be a great divide that divides many people, in the sense that you see someone has these attitudes like these, American culture sucks. We don't deserve to be here, and those kind of things. And they're talking to someone else who doesn't have those attitudes, and there's like this bridge that can't be really passed unless you sort of understand that these people, it has nothing to do with policies. It has nothing to do with government decisions and these kinds of things. This has to do with the mindset that's buried deep into the subconscious. And that is what has to be tapped into. And, even I don't try to be negative in my broadcast. I'll just say this much, though. Maybe sometimes even in our religious services, we always emphasize, well, the world, everyone's all sinning out there, and, things are so much worse now than they were back here, and these things are happening, and life sucks. Well, that does give a certain, this may be why there's a lot of people that actually have a high libido, a high eros attitude that actually may gravitate away from religion, because we do emphasize the negative too much and not the positive. So we have to guard against that too. But ultimately, I think what we need to understand is that, we are part of not just individuals, but we are part of a society. And our society influences us just as we influence a society. And this kind of self-destruction that we're seeing, where people are happy, they think it's great when they find out that their friends are, saying, "Oh, I can't wait till I'm old enough that a doctor will sterilize me," or something like that, and they're thinking, that's so fantastic. And, getting into this idea that fatherhood and motherhood are optional. And ultimately, it's not really optional. They're actually kind of, a lot of times people are really happy when someone will say, no, I'm just going to live life for myself. But ultimately, if you get very many people in a society that start feeling this way, then your society has no chance of surviving. I mean, this goes beyond the individual or that particular family that will die out. It goes into the society in general that they're part of. It'd be like your finger suddenly like, okay, I'm going to just kind of wither away here and fall off. Well, then that decreases the strength of the rest of the body. Okay, you can't be just, amputating parts of your body and expect to be viable in the future. So, maybe look into this. Look into this whole idea of Thanatos and Eros. And perhaps Freud did tap into something. I mean, you can't prove it. You can never really prove anything in psychology, especially, my gosh, behaviorism. Let's put a white lab coat on and write down all kinds of statistics and pretend like we are as much scientist as a physicist or a biologist. Well, no. In fact, from my understanding, the psychology, when it's used that employs Skinnerian psychology, is actually less effective than psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. So, you could look at it philosophically, you could look at it psychologically, you can look at it scientifically. It seems that there's something in our human nature that just propels us towards destruction. And unless we nurture that part of us that is propelled towards, positive, creative, life-sustaining, and continuing our culture into the future. Unless we nourish that, then the other part takes over, And that's pretty much the end of things.